The play on the field, the courts, and the ice is just one part of sports. Behind every game are the people hard at work so we can enjoy the action. They're the owners, administrators, agents, broadcasters, and promoters who bring the games to life. Meet them when you go behind the game with Patrick Klinger and Bill Robertson. Welcome to another edition of Behind the Game. I'm Patrick Klinger. There's Jay-Z, there's P. Diddy, and there's B-Rob. All famous in their own right. He's the commissioner of the Western Collegiate Hockey Association and Egan's most famous rapper, Bill Robertson.
Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Patrick. That's a first for me as a rapper, but I'll take it. I'll take it. Our special guest today, audience, is a native of Hastings, Minnesota, a former collegiate football player at the University of Minnesota, an NFL player for the Indianapolis Colts and the Cincinnati Bengals. He's co-authored a book. He's a Super Bowl champion, and he's also a singer and an entrepreneur and an outstanding business person. Our guest today is Ben Utecht. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. I'll start with the first question for you, and we want to make this fun, and I think you have a great story, and I think our audience will enjoy hearing from you today. You were, as I said at the outset, you're a professional athlete, you're an author, a singer, a corporate motivational speaker, a businessman, a brain health advocate. How do you do all this?
And I'm a dad of 4 daughters.
Yes,
okay, so
that's true.
Here we go.
Most importantly.
Yeah, right. And so, I actually ask myself that question every single day. I've always been kind of a jack of all trades type of a person. It's just a natural part of my personality, and so I'm really someone that operates well, within kind of chaotic situations. The more, the merrier. Each one of those is connected to my passions. That's really the easy answer to that. From philanthropy to business to the messaging that I use in speaking, it all really comes out of the things that I care the most about. And so really that makes it easy. It makes it fun and enjoyable.
But first of all, let's talk a little bit about your health, which has been well documented over the last 5 or 6 years. How are you feeling physically and mentally?
Thank you for the question. I feel really the best that I've ever felt, to be honest with you, and it's somewhat miraculous for me to say that, because having to walk away from football, the sport that I love to play, due to brain injury, was a scary time. I mean, I was struggling cognitively, was having issues with short and long-term memory, and so at the time, with the messaging we were getting in the media, the only thing I could think of was I have this brain disease that all these other guys, former players, are experiencing. When in reality, I had some cognitive weaknesses that I was able to do something about. And so I worked with a company and I trained my brain for a whole summer, 3 months, 100 hours. And at the end of that program, my neuropsychological test scores were just off the charts. And I regained my ability to store memory, to focus for extended periods of time, and really feel stronger cognitively now than I ever have. I almost wish I would have been able to do that training before football, because it would have helped me learn the Peyton Manning offense a lot easier.
Let's talk a little bit about your football career going back. You had a great prep career at Hastings High, and you played in several big games as a high school player. Then you opted to play collegiate football at the University of Minnesota for Glenn Mason.
Yeah.
Did you always want to be a Golden Gopher?
I always wanted to stay home in the great state of Minnesota. My whole family is here. And it's a really cool story, because I had scheduled a trip to Penn State. They were looking at me amongst some other schools. And the week before that trip was the Minnesota Gopher summer football camp. And so this is just after my junior year in high school. I'm still 16 years old. I was young for my grade. And so I go up to camp, and at the end of those 3 days, Coach Mason asked me in his office with my dad, 16 years old, and he offers me a verbal scholarship and reaches his hand across the table, and without thinking, it was like, yes. So I was one of the youngest to commit, and it really was one of the best decisions I could have made.
You were a 4-year starter at the University of Minnesota. You started 35 out of 44 games.
Mm-hmm.
You played in the Music City Bowl, one of the greatest tight ends the university's ever had, yet you weren't drafted.
Yeah.
How disappointing was that?
Oh, man. In so many ways, it was debilitating. I think, you know, the one saving grace in it was that it was because of an injury. You know, it wasn't for lack of talent or opportunity. It came after a very serious injury I took my senior year, where I tore the abdominal muscles in my lower abdomen, and it was a pretty serious injury. Took me out of the rest of the season and took me out of the NFL draft. But 2 months before the draft, I spoke at a banquet with Tony Dungy on the U of M campus, and in front of about 700 alumni, he said, if for some reason you slip through the cracks, if you don't get drafted, I promise you I'll be the first person to call. So fast forward 2 months, I don't get drafted. I'm sitting across the desk from my agent thinking that maybe this is the end of my career because of this injury. And the free agent market opens, and about 10 seconds later the phone rings, and I pick it up, and it was Tony Dungy. He was the first person to call. And they said, we want you to be a Colt. We know what the injury is. We're going to get you surgery so that you can get better. We're going to pay you as though you're a playing rookie, but we want you to just sit out the first year and get better. 3 years later, I'm one of the starting tight ends on a Super Bowl championship team. So it's so interesting, because if I don't get injured, Patrick, there's no Super Bowl. I get drafted high like I was supposed to go to another team, and I'm not wearing this ring. So it's interesting how fate kind of has a hold on things.
I mean, you played in a Super Bowl, and there's the ring right there that we can see. That's very impressive to have a NFL championship ring. You played in the Super Bowl in Miami. I believe it's the only Super Bowl that was played in inclement weather, basically in the rain.
Right.
Tell us about that experience of playing in a Super Bowl for our audience, and then also playing with a superstar who I think is a very funny guy, and you probably believe the same, but I want to hear from you
Sure.
about Peyton Manning.
Well, it was a dream come true. It really is hard to put into words. I mean, Hastings has 15,000 people, you know, and to go from Todd Field in the middle of the city to playing in front of 101 million people worldwide was, you know, truly magical. And everything about the game, you know, puts, I think, life's most important things in perspective. You know, from the weather, the climate, it being unique that this is the first time 2 African-American head coaches had ever made it to the Super Bowl, let alone won the Super Bowl. So there was history-making moments in this game. To the personal, where I run out of the tunnel and I hear this voice screaming my name, and I turn and there's my dad, who like worked his way halfway around the stadium, hanging over the railing, you know, and I ran back to him, and it was this cinematic moment, right, that you would imagine in a movie. And I reach up and I grab his hand, and it's I love you, and it all started in the backyard playing catch with you. And you know, I mean, so it was a really surreal moment until Devin Hester caught the opening kickoff and ran it all the way back on the first play of the game. But you know, I talk about this a lot when I talk about the championship culture of Indianapolis. After that play, I was in between Peyton Manning and Tony Dungy, and it is if the play didn't even happen. You know, Peyton, it wasn't even focusing on the celebration happening in the Chicago Bears end zone. It was just focused all on the culture of Indianapolis, which was the Colts way, and whoever makes the least mistakes and plays the most efficient football is going to win the game. And you know, that fear went away, and we went out and won 29-17. And you know, Peyton is who you see in the commercials is exactly who you get in the huddle. So it made for an incredible experience.
Pat?
That Super Bowl was the Super Bowl where Prince performed at halftime in a monsoon.
Yeah.
And it's generally regarded as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, Super Bowl halftime performances ever.
Ever, yeah.
As a performer yourself, have you ever gone back and looked at the video and to watch the performance? Because obviously you were in the locker room.
Yes. See, I'm so glad that you formed the question that way, because until his passing, I had never watched the halftime show. And so when that tragic news went public, I had this moment in my home by myself in my office, and realizing, oh my gosh, I never once actually saw the performance, and I at that moment I watched it and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, to be on a glass stage in downpour, on platform heels, shredding the guitar, not missing a note. It's hard to put into words.
There's a great documentary about the halftime show if you haven't seen it.
Yeah.
And the producers were very concerned about him going out
Right.
in those conditions and the lightning and things. And he said, man, it is raining crazy. And Prince said, can you make it rain harder?
I know. It's crazy. It's crazy, and one of my partners in music that I do here in Minnesota, Mick Sterling, he was a part of the last performance that Prince ever did in Minnesota, where he surprised everybody and showed up to the Fireside Room at Chanhassen and literally just walked in off the street into a live show, one of Mick Sterling's shows, and asked if he could take the guitar and play along. Just crazy.
I'm guessing Mick said,
yes.
Sure.
Can you imagine? Sorry.
I'm sure he said,
Sorry, guys.
I'm sure he said yes.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about, you briefly talked about Tony Dungy and Peyton Manning, but go back to Tony Dungy. He's not your prototype when you think about an NFL coach,
Right.
about on the sidelines, so calm, so understanding of everything around him, a family man. I'm not saying coaches aren't family people,
Sure,
but he is so different.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, what a unique leadership style. One of the words that he uses for it is uncommon. And he's produced a leadership award over the last 5 years called the Uncommon Award. And I think that really describes his style at the core. Everything about the way that he teaches and coaches and lives his own life, I would say is uncommon. And it's through the lens of servant leadership. That the belief that if you build better men, you get better football players. And it was something that was practiced in Indianapolis from the top down. And so when you bring on rookies, when you bring on new staffing into that type of an environment where all of the leaders of the organization have bought into that style, man, it becomes an environment that you can thrive in and that you want to be at every single day you walk through the doors. And that's the human condition at work that he created.
Well, he's been through a lot. He lost a child, which is tragic forever. Do you ever think he'll end up coaching again in your mind?
Well, I do remember that his approach to coaching in the NFL was that he and his wife took every season one at a time, and they would spend time together in prayer after every year, which would determine whether or not he would go back for the next. So I guess I would never say no, but I think he's in a pretty good place right now. I think he's pouring his life into his philanthropy with All Pro Dad and prison ministry, and obviously he's a fantastic anchor, and he's really enjoying that as well. So I don't know if I would leave that to go back.
I understand.
Ben, you suffered multiple concussions, more than you can probably count. In fact, it was a concussion that ended your career when you were with the Cincinnati Bengals. And it was determined that you really shouldn't have been cleared to play after that last concussion. And you filed a grievance against the Bengals, which you won.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that process and,
Sure.
and how that how that transpired and where it sort of led the NFL after that experience.
You know, and you would understand this having been with the Twins for many years, but grievances are pretty normal occurrences. When a player has an injury and they have to exit the team due to that injury, it's very common for an injury grievance to be filed, and then you know, really relatively quickly within weeks, if no more than 3, 4, 5 months, is that grievance usually decided, you know, between the agent and the team. My situation was unique though, because this was at the dawn of the spotlight of the concussion injury, and so what was at stake in my grievance was return to play protocols. And I think because of the nature of my grievance, I think the NFL and the Players Association knew the weight of this. The Players Association wanted to win because it was going to set a precedence for how players would be treated in the future. And so what was typically a 3-month process turned into almost 3.5 years before we won that ruling, which just goes to show how important that that grievance. We'd even forgot about it as a family, because it was like, this is just going to keep going on. But we won, and it did. It set I think it set new standards for the treatment of players in concussion, and I think it's allowed us as fans to enjoy the game better today. I don't think it's really taken away from the game. I'm enjoying the game as much now than I did, you know, if not more, because I know that there are rules in place that are going to protect the most important part of an athlete.
Do you believe that the NFL overall is doing enough for the athletes that are playing the game professionally when it comes to injuries? And it may not just be a brain injuries, or it could be an ankle sprain or a thumb injury or whatever it is. I've always been curious from a player's perspective, your thoughts on that. And that's a loaded question for a lot of people, because there's a lot of different ways to go with it, but I want to hear from you.
Sure. I mean, I don't look at it as a loaded question. I think that there are some obvious realities. Can you ever do enough to protect the brain? Can car manufacturers ever do enough to protect the brain? My point is that I think that the NFL has done very good things, but I think from a Players Association to the NFL, we should always be looking at how we can continue to improve for athlete brain health. And so the rules that are in place now, with the non-biased neurospecialist on the sidelines, with the non-biased neurospecialist who's in the media booth that can stop play at any time. I mean, the targeting rules, all of those were not in place when I was playing. So from that perspective, you know, I applaud the NFL and I applaud the Players Association for advocating for those measures. But as we continue to go on in this game, we're going to continue to have to deal with this issue. And so we should constantly be asking ourselves, what more can we do? What more can we do without taking away from the game we love, but make athlete brain health a priority?
You have 4 daughters, but if you had sons, would you allow them to play football today? Or would you, at least would you make them wait until they were a little bit older?
And that's an interesting question too, because studies are showing that there may in fact be more prevalence of concussion in sports like soccer, especially for females, because there is differences in the anatomy of a boy and a girl, and one of those is neck strength, right? So I thought that I would be safe in answering that question, but the reality is that, you know, there are sports that my daughters could choose to be in that would put them at higher risk for concussion. And so my answer to that, though, has always been determined by age. You know, if a pediatric neurologist will tell you that ages 2 to 12 is the most important developmental stages of a child's brain. So for me as a parent, if I'm really listening to that, it's basically saying, read between the lines. You know, maybe 2 to 12 you should think about doing whatever you can to protect those most important developmental stages. So for me, that's kind of where I land in that. If I had sons that wanted to play football, I would allow them to play football, but I probably would be the dad that would hold them back, keep them into really competitive flag football leagues, teach them the game, the mental and the physical side, help them train and get ready for it, but just wait till their bodies get a little bit more mature and stronger, and then bring them into competitive football more in that 8th, 9th grade time frame.
I'm going to go off our questions for a second.
Yeah.
As a person, you said you played off air, you said you played hockey growing up.
Yeah.
You come from a hockey lineage with your grandfather, Bob Utecht. Tell me, do you believe that is it better for a young person, male or female, to play multiple sports growing up
Yeah.
versus specializing in one sport? Now, you obviously made it all the way to the big stage,
Sure.
the NFL, major college football, and the Super Bowl. But do you think it's important that a young person play baseball, soccer, tennis, golf, etc.,
Yeah.
swimming, diving, whatever it is?
Right. Well, look, I think it's one of the most difficult subjective issues in sports right now. And I say that because, I grew up playing being a three-sport athlete, and that was a benefit to me when I was being recruited. At the time, colleges were saying, we want to bring on people that are doing more than just one sport. That's, then that's completely changed. But then you have the success of people like Tiger Woods, who only did one thing. And so because that is true, can you fully take that away from somebody as well? So I really do think that, from my own perspective, that the more you can provide, the more opportunity that you can provide, the more a child has to identify the things that really make them who they are. And I think that that's really important, because identity is a big problem when transitioning out of pro sports. I mean, our statistics are pretty scary. 70% of all professional athletes are bankrupt within 2 years outside of the league. Well, a lot of that has to do with your identity being wrapped up into one thing for your entire life. Like, all you are as a person is a football player. Well, because of all of the experiences that I had growing up I was in 5 choirs, and I was in band. I did the theatrical arts, and then I did 3 sports. So I had this really amazing opportunity to discover who I really am. And that helped me later in life as I transitioned out of that NFL platform.
And one of the things that you did after finishing your NFL career was to write a book.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about counting the days while my mind slips away.
Yeah.
What's the backstory on the book, and why did you write it?
I never set out to write a book. The author, Mark Tabb, the co-author, was a New York Times best-selling co-author from Indianapolis, knew my story, wanted to tell my story, and so I was connected through a literary agent, and that's where the process really began. And I think because it was the dawn of the concussion crisis, as people like to call it, this book provided an opportunity to tell an emotional story. And I'm a vulnerable guy. It's a part of who I am. You know that, and so I have no problem talking about my feelings and sharing my greatest fears. And this book really, I think, is about giving people an inside look into what some of those fears are. At the same time, the foundation of it is a hope-filled story, with an ending that is really quite miraculous, having to do with the re-strengthening of my cognitive abilities and really coming to a healthier place than I've ever been. And that's a message I think a lot of people need to hear, and really what the book is about.
Well, I mean, he and I are going to dive into the book, and I think it's important that our audience know that the time and effort it takes to put your feelings down, as well as write a book.
Yeah.
takes a lot of time, and people don't really understand. It's not something you just snap and do in 10 minutes.
No, in fact, so Mark actually came up to Minnesota for a week, and he interviewed all of my family, and then we spent a number of days together, and just to show you like where I was at, and as an example, and these were really occurring in my life frequently, but one of the days that we spent together, we were going to take a break and go and out to see a movie, and he had wanted to see, I think it was one of the Mission Impossible movies, and he had requested that, and I said, "Oh, yeah, I haven't seen that movie. I'd love to go see that." So we went to it, and about halfway through the film, something happened on the screen that caught me funny, and I had this deja vu moment. And then I keep watching it, and all of a sudden, I remembered that a week ago I came with somebody else, with another friend, and I had seen the movie. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I still kind of get chills with stuff like that, because it's hard to explain to somebody what that actually feels like. I mean, I literally had no memory of that. Mm. And I walked in there and I sat down, and then something triggered it, and I was like, oh, wow. And then it kind of all came back, you know, and those are some of the things that were kind of consistently happening to me at the time.
We're down to about 2 minutes, and we have 1,000 questions we could ask you. But I think one of the things that I wanted to know, the first thing is your life balance. You're a father, you're a husband, you're an entrepreneur, you do all these things. How have you balanced all that over time? I want to know what the secret or what's in the sauce to make that all work for you.
Purpose. My dad's a pastor. I grew up in a faith environment, and that gave me a very keen sense of the belief that I was created to do something that has purpose. And so when I look at my life, my wife and my beautiful daughters and the things that I'm trying to do, it really all is connected to the same purpose, which is pouring into the relationships of the people that I love. And when I do that with all of my heart, the doors, the opening of doors and the success that comes in each of the areas just kind of seems to flow naturally. But the fact that there's purpose behind it, gives value and significance to everything that I'm doing. Otherwise, what's the point? What's the point in doing it? And so that's where I find the balance.
In these last 30 seconds that we have, I want to mention in Andy and Ben Christmas that you've been doing with Mick Sterling, who I mentioned earlier, for a number of years now. So that's coming up in December. I think we've got 12 shows.
Yes, we do.
At the Chanhassen Dinner Theater.
He and I want to attend.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
I've been there. It's fabulous.
Yeah.
The guy can sing.
and rap. So we'll have to do like a duet rap together, because you're the Rob.
That would be fun.
No, hey, Ben, thank you so much for being
Oh, you're welcome.
Behind
Anytime.
the Game. We really appreciate it. You're a good friend and good man, and we're delighted you're here today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
You're welcome.
Billy Rob. And thank you for watching Behind the Game.